You don't have to wait for happiness. You can tap into it right now. This is Happiness on Tap, the podcast where we talk about real growth, radical self care, and the small shifts that lead to big transformation. I'm your host, Leann Herron. I'm a certified life and health coach and transformation coach for women. And together, we're reclaiming happiness one episode at a time. Today, I am joined by the brilliant Charmian Johnson, once a global law partner, now a somatic, trauma-informed coach who knows exactly what it looks like to be successful on the outside while secretly battling self-doubt, perfectionism, and imposter syndrome on the inside. Charmian reveals why these struggles aren't just in your head. They're patterns wired into your body. And more importantly, she shows us how to finally rewrite them so you can ditch the inner critic, quiet the overdrive, and step into calm, grounded, unstoppable confidence. Let's welcome Charmian to the show. Charmian, it is so wonderful to have you join me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited for this conversation. So for our audience, if you have ever felt like you don't belong at the table, even when you've more than earned your seat, this conversation is your permission slip to finally ditch the inner critic and calm your confidence. So grab your favorite drink, get comfy, and let's dive in. You don't want to miss this one. Charmian, your journey from global law partner to somatic trauma-informed coach is powerful. What was the turning point that made you step away from law to pursue this path?
Yeah, it's a question that's often asked, actually, when you think you've had such a glittering legal career. Why on earth would you step away from that? So I've been a lawyer for over 27 years, worked at global law firms for almost 30 years. And the turning point for me came at the start of lockdown. So in the UK, that was around March 2020. And the global pandemic had hit. And unfortunately, my brother was an alcoholic, and lockdown for addicts generally was a really awful time. I mean, it was awful for a lot of people in many ways. But for addicts, it meant that they didn't have the usual distractions and support. So meetings stopped. My brother couldn't go into the office to distract himself from his tortured self and his overwhelming feelings. He was going through a divorce at the time. So he was on his own in a flat in central London. And essentially, he just drank himself to death. It was a car crash in slow motion. And it was absolutely devastating. And I think at that point, grief, a need for answers, led me to start looking into addiction. But more than that, after my brother died, my parents, I think they thought his death reflected badly on them as parents because he was an alcoholic. And I think they saw shame in that, or felt shame in that. Long story short, with my parents, I'm actually no contact with them now and have been for around 4 or 5 years. And as I said, grief, confusion, and need for answers led me to want to find answers and community and really some support, because not lots and lots of people that I knew or generally have gone no contact with the parents. So I just needed some support with that. And I started looking for an online community, and I found one that dealt with various like narcissism and various certifications. And the one that leapt out to me was the somatic trauma-informed coaching certification. And it was really for me, a bit of healing for me, personal growth for me. And as I started going through that training, I just had light bulb after light bulb, thinking, oh, that's why I never had any self-belief. That's why I never felt good enough. Because despite being arguably at the top of my game, being a partner at a global law firm, as you said at the outset, I still didn't feel good enough. And light bulb after light bulb doing this training just meant, now I've started to understand why I am the way I am. And having that awareness meant I could do something about it, because it had blighted my career until that point. So it was just an absolute sigh of relief that it wasn't just who I was and I could do something about it. So again, long story short, I just thought this stuff that I've learned is like absolute gold dust, and it's far too good not to share. And that's why I decided there and then that actually, when I completed my training, I was going to start a somatic trauma-informed coaching business. And if I could help at least one other person, then I would be very, very happy. So I'm now very, very passionate to share this message. When it became clear at my law firm that I couldn't do both, I resigned from the partnership, and my coaching practice is very much my focus and passion. And that's what's led me here today.
Thank you so much for sharing your story and how you got there. And you and I have talked before this. We have similar stories. My background was also in law. I ended up having to leave during the pandemic because there was a trauma that had come up from within myself. So a trauma response from a trauma that was 20 years prior, that was triggered by a case that we had accepted during the pandemic. And, so getting to step out of that role, I was blessed enough with the financial ability to leave my career and spend time working on my mental health and my physical health, because it was really all being affected by this trauma response, and I didn't know what that was. And so I was able to want to learn and understand what my body was going through. Like, why was I experiencing brain fog? Why was I having anxiety and panic attacks, things I had never had before? Where were these things coming from? So learning about my body, and that our bodies hold on to trauma, and that there were modalities that were available that could help me understand and learn tools for, not just coping mechanisms, but actual tools to help me heal. I was like, you, this is gold. Why did I never know these things existed? Why did no one ever tell me about these wonderful modalities? And so that became my passion with this podcast, was to be able to share these modalities with people so that they could know what is available to them in the world, just to either be educated or to start to understand, like you said, start to understand, oh, well, this is why I'm this way, and this is why I experience this, and this is why I feel that way. Because I think knowledge is our greatest power.
It's very empowering, isn't it? Knowing that you can learn about yourself and do something for yourself. And that is why I agree totally with you. Why has nobody ever told me this before? Some of this stuff we should be taught at school. It's that important, I believe. And I think the somatic side of it, a lot of people say to me, well, Charmian, what's somatic trauma-informed coaching? And trauma-informed means that I understand how stress and trauma affects our nervous system and influences how we show up today. And somatic comes from the Greek word for body, because we don't think anxiety, we don't think depression, we feel it, don't we? So I think talking therapy can be great for some people. People can feel seen, heard, validated. But for some people, it just doesn't give them that effective, lasting change. And I think that's where the somatic, the brain-body connection, really is often the missing piece for lasting change.
I agree. I think, like you said, talk therapy is very helpful for some people. Um, I think for a lot of people, it can go on and on and on and on, just that constantly reliving and rehashing those traumatic experiences, but never really learning tools on how to release them for our body, from our body. And so, yeah, it was, learning things like somatics was so huge in releasing that from my body, and learning that, the power of breath and focus and intention, and that we really have more control over our body than we ever realized that we did. And so
Yeah.
I think it's a fantastic modality that I want to make sure that more people learn as much as they can about it. So again, I'm one excited to have you on the show to share what you do and who you help. And if I remember correctly, this is your coaching now is you're actually helping other professionals in the legal field to learn these modalities.
Yeah, that's right. I think the legal sector is where my lived experience is. So I think my niche, if you like, is to help other female lawyers, high achieving women suffering with self-doubt, perfectionism, and imposter syndrome, because that was me. I hated putting my hand up for anything, hated public speaking, and now I actively seek it out. So it's a really big change for me from maybe 5, 10 years ago.
Yeah, I can definitely see how that would be so beneficial to these women um, in power in those high ranking positions, because I know we all struggle with imposter syndrome. And I know that many people believe that imposter syndrome is just negative thinking. From your perspective, what really happens beneath the surface?
Yeah, imposter syndrome. It's often this little shadowy figure, isn't it? But you do feel it. Um, I suppose a really good example I often use when people aren't that familiar with the brain-body connection is imagine that you're waiting in the wings, you're in an auditorium, you're about to step on stage to speak to, say, 100, 150 people. Somebody is on stage currently giving you your introduction. And even if you sat with that for a few minutes, I imagine a lot of people would start to feel the heart rate going up. They might start to feel a little bit edgy and maybe a little bit more energy in their arms and legs and, start more shallow breathing. So there's definitely a brain body connection. So it's not just in the mind. And that goes back to where we have to look at both. And I think logically you can think, well, maybe it's a big meeting you're doing, or it's a big public speaking presentation. Logically, you can think, I've trained for this. I've done lots of work on this. I've done this many, many times before, but my body's telling me a different story. That's there in the pit of my stomach. I'm not good enough. What if I get it wrong? Often the imposter syndrome has the inner critic fighting with it as well. And your brain is starting to create this narrative, but I think it's your body that's starting to perceive some sense of danger. And I say perceived sense of danger because we know logically that there's not a lion about to run up and eat us. There's no predator waiting for us. We just have to step on stage or go into this big meeting. So the body starts to perceive a threat. As I said, your heart rate starts to go up. You might feel a little bit sweaty, shallow breathing, as I said, and it's your autonomic nervous system that's taking over. You're coming out of your green calm zone into your fight flight because of this perceived threat. The nervous system's working really hard for you because it's thinking, right, we need to get the body ready now for fight or to flee. And there again, that's understanding. The understanding of your nervous system is absolutely the first step, because the minute you start going into fight flight, the emotional brain says, hey, I'm driving the bus. The front logical part of the brain is then very much a backseat passenger. So I think when we think about imposter syndrome, it's definitely not just in the head. We've got a whole load of stuff automatically going on because of that sense of danger, that perceived sense of danger. And remember, the brain's number one job is to keep you alive. Your brain doesn't care if you're going to be happy and successful by wandering onto that stage and doing a fantastic meeting. It just wants you to survive. So I think another really interesting point is that we don't actually think first, we feel first. So again, if you think, I'm about to go on stage and your body starts to, there might be, this fight flight response, there might be the inner critic, there might be the imposter syndrome starting, you're not ready, you're not good enough, what happens if you make a mistake? But I think once you start to be able to track and notice what's going on in your body. At that point, you can do something about it. And you mentioned tools and techniques, and there's some things that you can do to make you come out of that fight flight response back into a calm, grounded state. And the voices like the inner critic, maybe anxiety, all these other parts of us, the imposter, they might just start to settle down because the body's feeling calm and safe again. So I think that they're all really, really, they feel almost basic tips, but we haven't been told these. I was never told that, yes, all this stuff will happen automatically, but to come back into this relaxed, calm state, you have to be taught how to do that. I didn't know how to do that. So I think that's the key thing, knowing there's all this stuff automatically going on in your nervous system. And as I said, awareness and curiosity is absolutely the first step. So there's a whole host of stuff going on beneath the surface.
Yeah, and I love how you talked about that and how you explained the autonomic nervous system that's doing exactly what it's meant to do. Our brain is doing exactly what it's meant to do, keep us safe, but that, excuse me, that we can learn these tools and learn how to calm ourselves down. And we all have that little voice inside us. I mean, even if I'm a guest on a podcast, I am more nervous preparing for being a guest than I am for getting on and having this conversation with you. And it's just that little voice somewhere in the back of my head, that's doing those imposter syndrome things. I'm nervous about what I'm going to say about my business, or am I going to present myself well, or are people going to think I'm professional, or am I going to just, be a mess and make all kinds of errors? And, it's just, those are those voices that are all over. But having those tools available to us is so important. And like you said, we don't learn it. We don't learn it in school. Like that we can have that. I think we're so busy learning how to maybe walk on eggshells to avoid what's going on at home, whether it's parents fighting or, maybe having a family member with an addiction, or being a people pleaser, being codependent. Our body has become so programmed for fight and flight that we have certain mechanisms that we're used to utilizing to keep the peace, to stay safe, to be small. But to know the difference and be able to understand our body and what it's doing and how we can calm it down. Could you maybe share like a quick thing that you would advise someone who maybe is getting ready to step on that stage and they're having those reactions? What would be something that you would advise them?
Yeah, I've got a really good example. Actually, a few months ago, I spoke to a lady. She was at the point in her career where she was going to have to start doing these presentations to a larger number of people. And she was almost at the point of getting medication from a doctor because she used to feel so worried beforehand. So I talked her through a technique the technical phrase is bilateral stimulation. You might think, God, what's that? But actually, it's simply using the left and right hemispheres of the brain. So you can't actually see my hands. So if I bring them up, so if you were to tap your legs sort of alternately, I'll do it like this so you can see. So tap your legs left, right, left, right. When you're doing that, you're using both hemispheres of the brain, which then triggers this sense of well-being, and the body starts to feel safe and everything starts to calm down. So whereas you might have been in fight flight, it'll move you back down into the green, calm, balance zone, which is where you can communicate more clearly, which is definitely where you want to be when you're doing a presentation. So if you just think you're tapping your legs left and right quite steadily, alternately like that. And she did that for a few minutes before she went to do her presentation. And she said the difference was huge and she didn't need to go to the doctor. And I think there's various techniques. And perhaps we can talk about a couple of other ones later on, but bilateral stimulation, walking is a form of bilateral stimulation because you're walking left and right. So again, everybody always says go for a walk outside, don't they? Because where you're looking at nature, you're walking left and right. And I think often it's finding what works for you. The left and right works really well because I could be doing that now. If I was really nervous and I was doing an online presentation or a meeting, I can tap quite easily left and right under the desk and no one can see. You could even do that in a meeting. And actually, it even works if you squeeze your hands left and right. So you could have them in your pocket, on your lap, no one needs to see. So there's lots of little things like that. It doesn't have to be this 20-minute massive breath work exercise that you have to do in the morning before you get out of bed. It can be real practical, fairly straightforward things that you can do that will really help just to calm the nervous system down and bring you back into that calm, focused state.
Thank you for sharing those. I don't think I'd ever heard those before. So those are really helpful. I know that I definitely struggle with public speaking. I think once I get started, I'm fine. But it is that battle with your brain. Like, yes, I know what I'm talking about. I've done this before. I can do this again. I've taught before. And once I get started, I'm okay. But having those simple practices that can just get you over that edge, I think is so valuable. So yeah, I would definitely love for you to, maybe share a couple of more as we keep going into this conversation, because I think those are the tips and tools that are going to really help people now and in the moment. And they're also going to see kind of how you work with people, maybe what you experience with working with a client, like you shared in this story, which was very informative, and how it helped her so hugely just with those simple practices. So again, thank you for sharing. I will definitely ask you to share a few more. In your work with high achieving women, what common patterns do you see when it comes to imposter syndrome?
I see imposter syndrome as only being one of a number of different parts that tend to show up. And I talk about parts, and it's by way of an example. Somebody might say to Leann, do you want to go to a party tonight? There might be one part of you that thinks, I'd love to do that. And the other part of you might just think, I'm quite happy just staying in quietly and watching TV. So I talk about parts being different parts of us that we've all got. And I think the imposter part typically shows up with maybe an overachieving part, maybe a people-pleasing part, perfectionist part. But I think one of the most prevalent parts that shows up with imposter syndrome is this inner critic. And you referred to it earlier on when we were talking. And I think this inner critic likes to not be very kind to you sometimes. And again, as you said earlier, it wants you to stay small, doesn't it? Don't put your hand up for that. You'll never be able to do that. So just don't bother. And I think a lot of the time we think, oh God, I'm really angry with that. I wish it wasn't showing up. And actually, it's trying to protect you, isn't it? Because it thinks if you were going to do the thing like the talk, the meeting, whatever you're putting your hand up for, it thinks that you wouldn't be able to cope with that overwhelm. It's too much. So it's trying to get you to stay small. So all the time, your nervous system is working really, really hard for you. So I think that's one thing to remember. So then you can start looking at it a bit more curiously and with a bit of compassion rather than trying to berate that inner critic, and perhaps being not so kind to yourself. But I think these feelings of inadequacy, whether it's the inner critic, whether it's the imposter part showing up, they often stem, I think, from perhaps a past experience or someone's expectation of us. And remember, it's our perception. And I think often when we're younger, because our brain's underdeveloped, we interpret experiences as, well, it must be because of me. Because our brains, like I said, are underdeveloped. So, for example, my parents divorced when I was around 7. At the time, because I was quite young. I didn't think, oh, you know what, mum and dad are falling out. Sometimes this happens with adults, doesn't it? Because of my age and the underdeveloped brain, I think I thought it must be because of me. I'm not good enough. And when I learned that, I started to think, okay. So that could have been a real factor for me never feeling good enough. And that's only one example of my interpretation of an experience, because children are quite egocentric, aren't they? Must be because of me. And you think of all the different experiences that we have. And yes, it can be obvious trauma, the serious stuff, but it can be less obvious trauma too. I didn't realize parents' divorce could be traumatic, but it could be loss of a pet. It could be the birth of a sibling. It could be not being picked for the school team. There's a whole host of experiences that we had when we were younger that our underdeveloped brain would think, well, it must be because of me. And you can see that these negative beliefs started to form. So with the imposter syndrome, the perfectionism, all these different parts of us showing up, the overachiever, they're all trying to get a need met when you're small. It's just they're not much fun to have around a lot of the time when you're an adult. But I think that's the thing, isn't it, with trauma, obvious and less obvious trauma. They don't get time stamped into the past. So we keep reliving them as an adult. It's almost like something happens when we're small and our nervous system says, well, we're not having you feel that again because that's just too much to bear. And so it's almost like a marker in the sand. So every time your nervous system thinks you might be getting near to that core emotional wound, up pops one of these protector parts, the imposter, the inner critic. Oh, no, no, we're not letting you feel that pain. So they'll pop up to try and move you away from that threat. And that can look like not wanting to put your hand up, not volunteering for anything, just in case somebody might laugh at you. Or because I think what true confidence looks like, it's not never making a mistake again, is it? It's being okay with the outcome, whatever that looks like. And that's when you know you're really talking from your true self, because these parts pop up to protect that true self from the emotional overwhelm. But we just need to let them be heard. And I think that's something else we'll talk about, no doubt, about befriending these parts so that we can get curious as to why are you showing up for me? Because the parts are trying to protect you all the time. And I think that's just a really, again, curious way of looking at it.
Well, you hit a bunch of different things there for me personally. Also had my parents divorce when I was like 8. Um, I was the child of adoption. So I always had those, nobody wanted me. I'm not good enough. Nobody loves me. People leave. It must be because of me. I think I've carried that from birth through my adult years without ever having somebody help me be curious and feel okay with being curious and asking those questions and sitting in those feelings, as opposed to just pushing them down and pushing them down and pushing them down and ignoring them. And, that didn't serve me at all. I never took the time until I was starting to do this kind of work that I actually learned how to sit with those feelings and be curious. Like, why is this coming up now? What is showing up for me and why is it showing up? And so that has been in and of itself a very valuable tool to have in my toolbox. And there's still times it's really difficult. Like I'm not seeing that clearly. And so it's remembering that I do have these tools available to me. And I can call on them when I need them. Has really helped. But yeah, you hit on a few like different layers of what we go through from childhood and how it shows up in adulthood. And one thing that when I left the legal field, did the work, got ready to go into coaching, had just stumbled across a class to become a certified health and life coach, and while I was immediately drawn to it and excited about it, and, yeah, this is what I want to do. I want to share all these wonderful things with other people. And this is a way to do that while helping other people, utilizing skills that I had developed over my entire lifetime. But at the time, I was so thick in my trauma response that I had really bad brain fog and really severe memory loss. And I almost let those two things keep me out of the game. Like, I started thinking, how am I going to remember all this new information? Like, how am I going to, the health coaching part, how am I going to remember anatomy and nutrition? And even if I learn it, am I going to retain it? Or is it just, going to get lost in the ether with the rest of my memories? Because at that point, that's what they felt like. I felt like I'd wake up every morning and I was a giant etch-a-sketch, like somebody had just shaken me and I was blank. Or I felt like standing in a library looking through a Rolodex and all my cards were blank. Like, I couldn't remember people's names, people I had worked with for 10 years, 20 years. I could remember their face, but I couldn't remember their name or what law firm we had worked in together. Or, it was just overwhelming that I really was, for the first time in my life, doubting myself. And luckily, there was still that piece of me that was like, you've done this before. Because I had went to college in my 30s. And so I was like, okay, I've done this. Like, I know how to go to school. I know how to take notes, and I know how to be organized. So as long as I can do those things that I know somewhere in my core, I'll be okay. And as I kept doing the work, got involved in school, eventually the trauma kind of eased up. The brain fog moved away. My memories were coming back. And I was able to, get back to myself, but know that I had these wonderful tools to help me do that.
And they make all the difference, don't they? It's knowing that you can, well, it's catching yourself in a particular response or stress state and knowing there's something you can do. Because I think you asked me about some of the sort of patterns I see in these high achieving women that come to me. A lot of them think this is as good as it gets. This is just who I am. It must be in my genes, and maybe I'm getting older and this is just part of it, the memory loss, the brain fog. But I think having the tools sort of gives you that empowering feature again, where you think this isn't as good as it gets. I can actually do something about it. And I don't have to be in session with a coach or a therapist. I'm learning this that I can apply day to day. And also, I always say, what a gift to pass on to your children or your loved ones, because once you know this stuff, and I think it's almost like a superpower.
I agree. I have this conversation with my daughter regarding my grandson, and even her. It's like, we have spent a lifetime shoveling down our emotions, our feelings, not feeling them. Um, and now, I have these tools that can help sit with it, get curious about it, befriend it, invite it in, and the tools to help you release a lot of those. Like, I learned how to release a lot of things through hypnotherapy, which was very powerful for me.
Yeah.
But at the same time, just releasing and being familiar enough with my body, like learning how to do a body scan through meditation was one tool. And then the somatic part was the next part of that, how to release it, how to move it, how to relax it. Because through meditation, I could learn certain parts of that. I could learn to release it into the ground beneath me. and I learned the breath work side of it. But it seems like each time I learn more every day when I talk to someone like you or attend a class, I'm like, wow, there's another piece of this. It's still not the whole puzzle.
Mm.
And so I always feel like now instead of carrying around this backpack of bricks of guilt and shame and all those things, I'm carrying around this backpack of tools that I can open up and look in and go, okay, I want to use this one today, or I may need this one today, or I may not need this one today. But I really love too how you talked about the different parts of us and how we show up and understanding what that part is that's coming up for us at the time.
Yeah, because I think for so long we've been told, haven't we, as women, push through, just lean in, do it anyway, face the fear, do it anyway, all this stuff that almost suggests we just need to ignore these parts of us, you know, whether it's this inner resistance. And I think that's the difficulty, because I think these parts just want to be heard, because we're talking about these beliefs being formed a long time ago. Now, very often, and we could talk about the technique for this, but the more you ignore these parts of us, the more they want to be heard. And these feelings will just start to bubble up and bubble up. They're not going anywhere. So what we want to do is, like you say, get curious, befriend them. Why are they showing up? And I think once they feel and seen and heard, it starts to validate that older experience that you had, with the aim being to timestamp it into the past. That was then when you were little. You don't need that part anymore. You're an adult now. You've got this. And I often say to my client, I know it sounds a bit woo-woo, this stuff, but it actually works. And it's having that practical way of dealing with these parts when they pop up, rather than just suppressing them and pushing through and thinking, oh, this is as good as it gets. And I think that's the refreshing approach to this sort of thing. Welcome them in, as you said. Don't just fight them, tell them to get lost or whatever. Invite them in, get curious, befriend them. What do you think would happen if you didn't show up? And I remember I used to drive to work. I had quite a long commute to Manchester in the UK, where my office was. And I would have a big meeting inevitably a lot of the time. And I would constantly be talking to myself in the car saying, all right, anxiety and imposter, come on, let's have a chat. Why are you showing up today? What do you think would happen if you weren't there? And then you just sort of sit with it for a little bit and see what comes up. And inevitably you can start to get to know the part, what its fears are and what it's worrying about. And then you can start to say, but I'm 51 now. I've got this. I've prepared for this meeting, whatever it is. I've done it a lot. I've got this. And even if something goes wrong, I'm an adult, I can handle it. Because that part thinks that you can't handle it, because you probably wouldn't have been able to when you were little, which is why it was a traumatic experience. So again, it's just having the knowledge and how to approach it when this inner resistance and these parts pop up.
When you were talking about that, I was visualizing, like a small child, 4 or 5 years old, pulling on a parent's, jacket, saying, "Listen to me, listen to me. I need you to see me." And the parent just being like, "In a minute, in a minute, in a minute. I'll get to you in a minute. Just go and sit down. I'll get to you in a minute." And instead of that, kneeling down and saying, "What is it that you need? You know, tell me what you're needing from me, and let me give you that." That was the visualization that I kind of came up while you were talking about that.
Yeah, it's a beautiful way of explaining that. I really like that, Leann. And I think, how often do we give ourselves that bit of time and space just to reflect on something? We don't in modern society, do we? There's always another deadline, or we're rushing from place to place. We've got a million and one things we need to do. But it's just giving that little bit of time and space. And as you say, being curious and befriending those parts. It really is transformative.
So do you want to share maybe another one or two simple somatic practices that you offer to your clients?
Yeah. So Often on my desk at work, I have some sort of scented balm. It can be anything, just something that you really, really love the smell of. And we call it grounding, don't we? When somebody first said to me, Charmian, you just need to do some grounding, I'd be like, what's grounding? I thought it was spiritual woo-woo. And actually, what it means is engaging the senses. And when you engage the senses, it's impossible to think a negative thought. Who knew that? And it also, again, triggers the body into getting back to this state of calm and focus. So back out of the emotional part of the brain, back into the front, rational, logical part of the brain, and everything just calms down. And you can do that by literally having some scented balm on your desk. I've got one that's very portable. I just throw it in my bag, and you can just sort of smell that. And that makes you very present and gets you into that green calm zone. An expansion of that is engaging all the senses. So maybe again, before a really big meeting, you just get comfortable. You might want to look around the room. What can you see? What can you hear? Is there a scent in the air? What can you touch? All that sort of thing. And again, it just moves the body into that sense of well-being and relaxation. So that's a really nice exercise to do. So you can engage all the senses, or you can just have maybe some sort of balm on your desk or close to hand, so you can smell that. So that's a really good one. That works quite well. Another one that I quite like to do is the 5-2-8 breathing. So you could even go into the toilets at work and do it if you need to, or you could just do it sat at your desk at home. So you'd breathe in for 5 seconds, hold for 2 seconds, and then it's the long exhalation for 8 seconds. And if you do a few rounds of that, you start to notice that your heart rate will go back down. You start to feel that sense of calm and relaxation. And again, the body's starting to feel safe. The nervous system's thinking, well, you wouldn't be able to do that long exhalation if there really was a lion about to jump out and eat you. So the body thinks, oh, everything's good now. It's all calm. And you go back into that lovely, calm green zone. And I think the beauty of having these tools, and again, it's finding out which works best for you. It just means that the more you do this, the easier it becomes to get yourself back into the green calm zone. And that in itself builds resilience, builds this capacity. And it's not to say that you're never going to go into fight, flight or the freeze response. You absolutely want to go into your fight, flight and freeze response from time to time. That's what the nervous system's there for. But it means you're not stuck in those survival responses, which can lead to ill health and physical symptoms. So it's about catching it, using your tools, and bringing yourself back down to that calm state.
Those are all great tools. I have a couple of those. I have a bottle of oil that's specific to calming your parasympathetic nervous system. So I can just unscrew the cap, take a little whiff of that. I have a stuffed sloth that is just diagonal from me that I can look up and see him. He's got a cute little smile. And I hung tapestries over my windows, one to help block sound for podcasting. But when the sun comes through them in the morning, I get all different kinds of colors that reflect on the walls, and they're very calming. I also like to just take a step outside, take off my shoes, walk in the grass, like you said, just some good grounding techniques. And sometimes it's as simple as feeling your butt in the chair, feeling your feet on the floor. Like you said, orienting to what's around you. What can you see? I like to be surrounded by things that bring me joy and happiness. So I have, artwork that means a lot to me from local artists. And I can just stop for a moment and gaze at a piece of art and calm myself down if I'm a little nervous before starting an interview or whatever the case may be. So those are great tools that I think people, and I like the other ones that you shared earlier. I think those were really beneficial too. So I appreciate you sharing all those. simple tools that people can access at any time, whether it's in your car, you're stressed out, when you're driving, if you're in the grocery store, people are annoying you, you've got your breath. You've always got your breath. It's always with you. And I know that there's a lot of research that talks about, how long it takes for that like peak anxiety to climb up, and then it starts to taper back down. And sometimes it's just giving yourself that time, doing those breaths and knowing. And for me, it was always being able to kind of talk to myself too, like that. Okay, my ex-husband isn't banging on the door, he's not outside the door, I'm safe where I am. And sometimes just saying that out loud a couple of times, always helped me calm myself down if I was having like an immediate panic attack over uh, seeing his truck in the parking lot where I worked, thinking, oh, he's found where I'm at. And then giving myself that time to process what I was feeling and acknowledging that I worked in a building that had many businesses in it and that he could have been there for any one of those other businesses and not even know I have a place in that business. So, just having different tools available to us,
Yeah.
that's the magic.
And it could be having a really cold glass of water with a load of ice in it on your desk. Because I think there's a lot of talk now about cold water therapy, isn't that? They're helping you build resilience. But we don't all have to plunge in the nearest cold lake. It could just be you've got a really icy glass of cold water, because again, the sensation of that brings you out the emotional part of your brain, back into the front part of your brain, and just calms you down again. So as you say, there's a whole host of different tools, and it's finding the ones that work best for you.
And I appreciate you sharing a lot of those, so that people will know the benefits of working with like a trauma-informed somatic coach or practitioner, to learn these tools and to learn what's possible outside of traditional talk therapy. And that, having these tools on board, knowing how to use them, knowing they're available to us, um, and rebuilding that power within us is so important when we're feeling those lower feelings, those lower emotions. Um, and just knowing, well, I can choose to have a good day. I can choose which emotions I want to pull on. And so that always helps me as well when I'm kind of having a day that may not start great. There may be a crazy storm outside, or I may have gotten some bad news, but that I can choose what I'm going to focus on right here, right now, this conversation with you, what I'm learning, what I'm going to be able to share with other people to help them. And all those other thoughts and feelings, emotions just kind of dwindle away. And they're not keeping me stuck in whatever that emotion is at the moment.
So isn't it? Yeah, it's back to the awareness again, isn't it? And we actually feel first, not think first. So if we're more in touch with our bodies to how we're feeling and take steps to calm ourselves down, the thoughts will then follow, rather than the thoughts taking over. And they're usually incorrect anyway, the thoughts. I think I heard something the other day that at least 50% of our thoughts are untrue. So it's quite a high percentage. So calm the body and hopefully the thoughts will follow.
So for women who have been living with self-doubt for decades, you and I know that it's possible to change. But what would that journey look like for somebody so that they can start seeing that possibility?
Yeah, so I've talked a lot about awareness and curiosity. I think the women come to me because they're sick of feeling a particular way, whether it's the anxiety, the self-doubt, the imposter syndrome. They just feel like that they're sick of it. So we start with talking about these practical tools and techniques so that they can manage the symptoms, if you like, whether it's the anxiety or whatever, just to bring themselves back down to a calm, relaxed state. So that's one part of it. Then we start to go back and look at the root cause resolution. So you currently deal with the adult tools to manage those symptoms, calming you down. Then we look back at the younger self, and perhaps where these negative beliefs were formed. So we can deal with the root cause resolution then. And then finally, you start to look at a future self, which is using a lot of positive psychology. So somebody can thrive, not just exist. So I think that's just a really nice way of looking at the ideal journey. But I think the key thing is using these techniques and being curious about where these behaviors and emotions have come from. And sometimes it can be uncomfortable. And it sounds such a cliche, doesn't it? But it's getting comfortable with the uncomfortable and understanding and trusting that it will lead to personal growth. So it's not always an easy journey. But as I said, a lot of people come to me because they're fed up with it. And so they'll try anything. And a lot have been to talking therapy. And this seems to, I think when they understand what's happening physiologically, not just psychologically, I think that's when the breakthroughs happen, because they start to think, I'm not crazy. And this isn't as good as it gets. Now I know why I freak out when I'm going into a big crowd of people at a networking event. Okay, well, I can just take myself off for a few minutes, do my breathing techniques, and I'm fine, I'm good. I think because we don't generally get taught how our system operates and why we're acting the way we are, you just think you're crazy. But I think it can take some of the shame away as well. I'm not broken. Actually, it's about safety in the nervous system. High achieving women have got the ability. It's the safety in the system that they lack. And when they know how to get that safety, it is a game changer. So it can be a longish process, and you peel back different layers. I think you alluded to it earlier on in the conversation. You might start with something and you unveil another layer. And I always say healing, it isn't a destination. We're learning and growing all the time. And success to one person might look different to success for another. So I won't ever promise somebody a massive transformation. Success to one might mean I'm not as triggered anymore by that person. It might be that I can do things that I couldn't do before. And we always talk, don't we, about Bessel van der Kolk, the psychiatrist whose famous book, The Body Keeps the Score. Trauma comes back as a reaction, not a memory. So if you can just downgrade that trigger, then that can be game changing for some people. So yeah, I think it can be a long journey and one that's never finished, but ultimately people can feel more confident. And I think it's that relationship with themselves that's the most beautiful thing that changes, because you start to think, actually, I'm quite proud of myself and I like who I am. And it's strange, sometimes access to you becomes quite privileged and you won't tolerate certain stuff. And things that happen start to be somebody else's issue. It's not a reflection of you. And I think you start to see people through new open eyes, and it's more, oh, what's happened to them, not what's wrong with them, and then taking it personally. So there's lots of subtle shifts. And if people are genuinely sick of feeling a particular way and they're stuck, it can be quite a beautiful journey. Not always easy, but I think the personal growth is one that's so fantastic.
Yeah, and when you start to feel those little shifts and you start to see that daylight on the other side of the tunnel, they're huge. Like you talked about, maybe not being as triggered by somebody. Um, that was huge for me. Um, and that was one of my big wins through hypnotherapy. That was a focus that I had, was I am living in this constant trigger. Every time somebody brings this person up to me, I am immediately triggered and I have horrible reactions and responses, and I want to either run away or lash out, or, I just never had the same reaction every time. But I wanted to learn techniques so that I wasn't triggered every time this person's name was mentioned. And hypnotherapy was absolutely huge for me in that. And that to me was like a huge win. Like, I wrote it down. I was just like, I cannot believe the difference now in me when somebody brings that person up versus 5 years ago or 3 years ago. And some of that power too came in learning about setting boundaries and being able to have a voice and speak up and say, I get really triggered every single time you bring up this person. I would appreciate if you could stop doing that. And it was just having that voice, because we can't assume that other people know what we're thinking or feeling or experiencing. So for me, it was all those layers. Like you said, it was like unraveling an onion and peeling back another layer. Oh, I've never had a voice. I was always be seen and not heard as a child. And that carried me through my adult years into, like you said, not wanting to speak up at a meeting. My safety was in being quiet. Don't say anything. Just let everybody else talk. And so developing my voice was a huge win. It's like, I never had a voice. Now I have a voice and I can speak up for myself. And I feel confident in speaking at a meeting and not buried under shame or whatever that was, that part that kept me quiet. Setting boundaries and communicating those to others. That was another step in developing my voice. And so, yeah, just years and years of unraveling that onion, but seeing the win on the other side of it was so much more empowering than the pain that I had shoved down for a lifetime. And the changes in the personal growth is just like, you can't even put a quantifier on it. You feel it.
Yeah, and I think we don't want to suppress things, do we? Because if I think a lot of people live their lives in the fight, flight, freeze response, they don't realize they're living in a sort of stress response because they've been like that for so long. And I think if you think all the stress hormones that get pumped out when you're in a fight flight response, we're not meant to live stuck in those sorts of responses. And that's when it can manifest physically and you start to get ailments and niggles and ultimately long-term illness. So we really don't want to live our lives in the fight, flight, freeze response. And I think it's lovely how you've talked about your shifts, and you can see already how different it can be from individual to individual. And I think one of the things that I always think about for me personally is I constantly used to say to my partner, my other half, what's the matter? Oh, what's the matter? And I think I was hyper vigilant because I was always scanning for danger. Didn't know it at the time. And now I don't ask him what's the matter all the time now, which is good for him because he used to get annoyed with me for doing it. So I think those round you benefit as well, don't they? So yeah, there's lots of subtle shifts, and I do think it benefits people around you as well.
Mm-hmm. Mine was constantly saying, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. The simplest thing, like, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to fill the water pitcher before, whatever. It was such an ingrained habit to apologize first for whatever I did or didn't do. And having a partner that helped me stop doing that. Like you said, he'd get annoyed. I was like, you don't have to apologize all the time. Like, so he would help me kind of break that bad habit, because it was just like an ingrained habit in my daily life to apologize all the time. And that, I can even remember where it came from, being a child, coming home from school, walking in the door and thinking it would be just my mother home and saying, hi, Mom, I'm home for school. And then finding out that maybe she had a friend over for coffee. And I didn't know somebody was sitting in the other room. And to her, I was speaking when I shouldn't have been speaking. Like I should have walked in the room first and made sure nobody else was in there before I spoke. So I would get punished. And so I learned that how to apologize all the time, all the time, all the time.
And that's a great example of a protector part, isn't it? The apologetic part. Keeping
Mm-hmm.
you safe when you're younger,
But I don't need
but not
that
so
anymore.
much fun when you're an adult. Yeah, yeah. Great awareness. Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's the best part of the personal growth is that awareness of what we do, where it comes from, that we don't necessarily need those things that we needed when we were a child. Um, so yeah, it's so much power that we can glean from doing this self work. It's just so amazing. If you could leave our listeners with one takeaway or reframe about self doubt, what would that be?
I think I would say it's biology, not brokenness. This isn't as good as it gets, and you can change that. So I think I want to leave your listeners, viewers with some hope.
I love that. Thank you very much. So, how can our listeners find you? I'll make sure to include everything in the show notes.
Thank you, Leann. So I have a website. So if you type in charmjohnson.thementalwellbeingcompany.com, it should come up. And I'm also pretty active on LinkedIn. So because I've got a strange first name, unusual, let's say unusual first name. If you type Charmian-Johnson into LinkedIn, you should be able to find my profile page there, and you can get in touch via my website or LinkedIn. And you'd be very welcome.
And you do offer a 30-minute consultation?
I do, yeah. So it's a complimentary 30-minute conversation just to see what you might be struggling with and how we might be able to work together if we both think we're a good fit. So I'd welcome that as well. Everybody's welcome. You don't just have to be a female.
So you do work with both men and women?
I do, yeah, I do. I've got several male clients actually. It's just that I niche because I'm a female lawyer and that's my lived experience. But yeah, anybody, I'm happy to work with anybody that wants to free themselves of whatever they're struggling with. So yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your story, these empowering tools with us today. Your journey shows that imposter syndrome doesn't have to run the show. When we understand our nervous system and work with our bodies, we can step into calm confidence. To all of our listeners, remember you are not alone in this. Self-doubt is common, but it doesn't define your worth. If today's conversation resonated with you, I encourage you to connect with Charmian and explore her incredible work. Until next time, keep filling your cup with what nourishes you because happiness is always on tap. So thank you again for joining us today.